Hi guys, it's Maggie from Knitting in the Park, and in this video I'm going to show you a brand new trick that I learned to get even more life out of my favorite knitting needles. Some of my most favorite needles that I have, I've ordered through Knit Picks. I use their yarn quite a bit too, but their needles, I don't know, they're beautiful, they're easy to work with, they're very smooth, they last quite a bit, and this video is not a knock on them at all. When I say I knit a lot with these needles, I'm telling you I'm using these to bits. They're natural wooden needles too, so there's going to be some natural wear and tear, right? I'm going to switch this over and show you actually what I'm talking about in a minute here. But the wood is wearing unevenly, and it's a combination of the way I hold my needles and the patterns that I've been using. A lot of knit togethers, purl togethers, and some tighter stitches, which is creating this wear pattern in my needles. I just Googled around, also kind of put some of my own intuition together, and I'm going to try to sand these babies down or back to their kind of original shape. Now it will shorten the working part of the needle just a bit, but it'll save me from having to run out and buy new needles right away. So I'm okay with a little bit of a shorter needle. And we're going to start off with a size that I don't use that often, but I'm going to use it in an upcoming pattern. So I was kind of like, oh, what do I do? Do I wait and order new needles and wait a couple of days? I just bought a lot of yarn. I'll show you in another video. So I don't think my husband would appreciate me spending even more right now. So we're going to try to save these babies. Oh, you'll need some sandpaper, very fine grit sandpaper, and then either a nail buffer or some kind of fine buffing tool to smooth out or create the smooth finish you'll want when knitting after you do your sanding. So grab those tools and meet me back here. Okay, so these are my Knit Picks US size 5 knitting needles. And I'm not sure if you can see it here, but on this side of the needle here, there's quite a bit of wear. It's getting a little bit of a warp from all of my repeated love and use. So I've got my fine grit sandpaper that I borrowed from my husband's tool bench. And I've also got, now this is a sanding block, but it just happens to be a fine enough texture that I can use it for finishing and smoothing out my knitting needles. So there you go, now you can see it right there. So what I'm gonna do is just lightly sand down the tip of my knitting needle. Now I'm rotating it, so I'm not trying to sand just the one side. I'm trying to almost act like a pencil sharpener and file down the whole point to make a new one. So I'm just going to continue sanding this, working my way around the tip of the needle, trying to even or smooth out that gentle sloping or tapered point so that I get rid of that kind of indentation or warping that my knitting has caused. And then also, you'll notice that as you do this, the tip of the needle gets quite pointy and actually gets sharp. So you'll want to make sure that you also work the sandpaper across the top of the knitting needle to reduce the risk of stabbing yourself. I found out the hard way after this, when I went to knit with the needle, that I hadn't quite filed down the tip of the needle enough and it was quite pointy. So just keep working this. It's more of a by feel type of thing than it is scientific, and I think you'll realize once you're there and you're ready to go. The other thing to note, which is really cool, is that the color of the Knit Picks needles goes, I think this is the Caspian, it goes all the way through to the center of the needle. It's not just kind of a die that sits on top, which means that they're even more beautiful than I originally thought they were. So after you've gotten the sanding done with the tip of the needles just the way you want them, they'll be pretty smooth, especially depending on how fine of a grit you've gotten your sandpaper. But it's also a really good idea to take some kind of buffer, like a nail buffer, a nail file, when you, not the actual file, but the buffer, like the finishing tool to the tip of the needles to make sure that you're getting back to that nice smooth texture and finish that these needles are known for. Again, I'm just using this quite loved sanding block that you would initially, or actually for another project, wrap sandpaper around and use as like a form to hold and get appropriate, angles and different things. It's from my husband's toolbox. You can see the green from the needle actually coming off onto the sanding block, so you know that it's doing its job. And there you go. That is how to do it. So overall, I was pretty impressed with how the sanding my needles went. I've spent last night knitting with it to test it and see how I liked it. Two thoughts. Yes, it's great. My knitting needles are back. They're not warped, so it's smoother. I'm able to knit faster. They do have a different shape now, so that took a little bit of getting used to. I'm sure Knit Picks is sitting there going, well, yeah, Mags, of course they're different shape. You altered them. I would recommend using a little bit of very fine sandpaper and something to kind of buff out or polish the tips of the needles after you sand them. If you want to get back to that smooth pointed finish and get a little bit more life out of a particular pair of needles. That being said, you can always go and buy a new pair of needles. I just was curious to see if I could make my investments last a little bit longer, since Knit Picks are some nicer needles and I'm just not into throwing them out after a few years. So yeah, sanding your needles actually works.